of aftermarket accessories to choose from these days is ever growing, so we're here today to give you some insights and answer some of your questions relating to the Longranger fuel tanks. I'm here with Rick, the Managing Director of the Longranger. It was actually his father that started the business in his backyard of Jimny over 40 years ago. So Rick, why is it so important to have a Longranger tank in a vehicle that already has a tank fitted?
Yeah, look, when you're going away camping and stuff, it's not till you start to realise what you want to do with your vehicle that you'll start to realise a long-range fuel tank can add so much flexibility to where you're going, and it can actually be one of the most used accessories on your vehicle. So whether you're into camping, adventure or for work, it just adds so much more convenience to where you want to go, and not having to worry about that next fuel stop.
One question we hear quite a bit is why not just take a few jerry cans rather than go for a Longranger?
Yeah, look, that's a great point. And look, when Dad first started out, when I was about 10 years old, we went across the Simpson Desert with a couple of jerry cans strapped to the front of the bull bar. But since then, we've learnt more about it. And when you're going away in spaces that are premium, you're loaded up to the hilt, whereabouts you're going to put jerry cans. You know, you've got something like this Jimny's got a 30 kilo weight limit on the roof rack, so up there it's not really very good. There's not much room in the back of a lot of cars, and everybody's taken away all sorts of things, including coffee machines these days. So there's really no room to put jerry cans inside the vehicle. And ultimately, why would you want the hassle of jerry cans when you're going away on holidays? Yeah. Let's make life easy for yourself.
These days we're seeing a resurgence of petrol model vehicles. How does this trend affect the Longranger?
Look, it doesn't really affect us that much. We've been making fuel tanks for 40 years for both petrol and diesel. But one thing that has changed actually is emissions laws, and keeping up with those is something that we've had to strive to do. And like this Jimny tank, you can see our little black carbon canister on the front there, so we've engineered our own design, and these things are filled with carbon granules, and they help stop the hydrocarbons going up into our ozone layer. And we've been introducing those across our range. And although our basic diesel and petrol tanks remain the same shape, all of our petrol kits are now starting to include these canisters in the kit.
This Jimny, it's a fantastic car, very capable, looks great, very small. They come standard with a 40 litre tank. How do you get a massive 80 litre tank in such a small car without imposing on the car's capabilities?
Yeah, look, that's really interesting. The Jimny's been out for probably nearly 2 years now, and we have been balking at it for a little while. We look at it and think, geez, there's not much room under there. And so we decided to bite the bullet, and we had a crack at it. And so first of all, we get the car up on the hoist and we digitise it, and we come up with a few prototypes in our CAD system, and we start to chuck a few ideas around and see what we come up with, and then we settle on a final design. But one thing that did come out in the Jimny is that there wasn't much space under there. So fairly early on in the piece, we decided to modify the factory exhaust, and that gave us quite a lot of extra capacity under there, and that was ultimately where we found most of the space to get more capacity in our fuel tank.
Well, that sounds like quite a process, Rick. Can you tell me a little more on the actual design?
Yeah, well look, one of the first things we always put in one of our tanks is a baffle. It's just an integral part of every one of our tanks. And it adds strength to the bottom of the tank, plus we turn that into a dam. So where the pickup unit goes in the middle of the tank here, we help retain all of the fuel around the bottom of the pickup unit. And then part of the design process, as you making all the prototypes, that exhaust change I told you about earlier, that actually got us an extra 10 litres of capacity by modifying the exhaust. So in something like a little Jimny, that's going to be at least probably an extra 100 k's down the road, and that's really important in a little car like this. And then there's also the mounting system we've got to consider. We had a look at the Jimny mounting system, but the way it straps up to the floor, that wasn't really suitable for what we wanted to achieve. We were looking for maximum capacity, and by getting rid of the OE mounting system, we're actually gaining another 7 litres. So with just 2 changes to the design, we've actually got an extra 17 litres capacity in our tank. So they're really good gains. And that mounting system, we also incorporated some U-bolts. We've used part of the original mounting system, but we've also incorporated a few U-bolts in here, and that allows our tank to flex and twist with the chassis as you're going in all the rough stuff. And that extra capacity that we try hard to get on the top of the tank actually helps us stop by we don't need to have our tank hang so low. So that means we put a lot of effort in to try and get capacity up high, so we can actually have a good tank that has good ground clearance, so we don't affect your off-road performance.
And what about the exhaust we've removed? Have we got that covered?
Absolutely. Our kits come complete, and on the Jimny, even though we don't normally modify the exhaust, we've actually included the hot dog muffler and a couple of bits of pipe in the tank. And also on the side of the tank here, you can see our heat shield, and that helps prevent any heat going into our fuel tank, which is especially important on petrol vehicles. So yeah, we've got that covered too.
Great. Another question we hear all the time, how does this affect my fuel gauge?
Yeah, that is a big one. During the initial design stages, we certainly assess what we've got to do to try and make sure that the customer knows what fuel they've got left in the tank. So we have a look at the genuine pickup unit that's got the float arm on it, and sometimes we can modify that if it's only a minor modification, but sometimes our fuel tank might need a longer float arm so we can reach a bigger depth on it. And in the case of this Jimny, we put a brand new float arm on it, and it's a bit longer. Because our tanks are, as you can see by this one, it's a fairly odd shaped sort of thing, but our main aim is to get more fuel into the vehicle. But one thing that we do is on our website, we've got some pretty good FAQs, and we actually go to the trouble after we fit a tank in our car. We try and measure all the different stages, and we try and put that in our FAQs. So that gives the customer pretty good confidence of how their gauge will read when they get their new tank installed. But one thing we also recommend is that after you do get it installed, just set your odometer the first few tankfuls and get used to the new gauge readings, because we've got a lot different shape than what the original tank was, and it will read a little bit differently. But once you get used to that, you actually become quite comfortable with it, and you'll never know that you even had a new tank. The biggest thing is you can travel a lot further with it.
The majority of customers looking into the Longranger fuel tanks are often thinking of doing some touring in very remote places. What are the standout features of the tank in these situations?
Look, the obvious one is increased range, but the flexibility in where you can travel and being able to change your itinerary on the run. You might be sitting around the campfire and some guy tells you who was camped next door about some great waterfall or a gorge or something like that, or Aboriginal artwork. So just being able to mix it up when you're away and not being too worried about where your next fuel stop is. So often you see people go away and every night they're planning where they can go because they're worried about fuel the next day. So when you've got a Longranger installed, it opens up endless possibilities on where you can go. But then there's a few other things for remote travel that are pretty important. You could get contamination, bad fuel, or you might even just want to help a mate out who doesn't have a Longranger installed and needs a bit of extra fuel to get to the next stop. So one of the features that we've actually got in ours is a drain plug. It's across our range, and it's something that you might just need on the side of the road one day to get you back up and mobile.
A big concern of four-wheel drivers is going over their GVM. This can be a deciding factor on what accessories they'll add to their vehicle. What's your take on this, Rick?
Yeah, look, you've got a four-wheel drive to be adventurous. You don't really want to be travelling between servos, so GVM upgrades certainly should be high on the wish list, because the manufacturers don't really give us much to work with. But look, you also need fuel to get to all of the great places in Australia. So it should be also a really important accessory to consider. So take this Jimny for example. Its factory tank weighs 12 kilos, and that works out at 290 grams per litre of fuel, which isn't all that much. And now, after we've got our Longranger installed, our tank now weighs 30 kilos, but that's 386 grams of fuel tank weight per litre of fuel carried. So considering we've doubled the amount of fuel you've got and the range you've got now, I think the advantages of having a fuel tank far outweigh the disadvantages of not having one. More importantly, what you've actually got to consider is the extra weight of the fuel. So in the case of the Jimny, we're adding another 40 litres on board, and I think that'll probably weigh around about 32 kilos, that extra fuel. So the actual fuel you're carrying is the biggest contributing factor to adding weight when you're adding a long-range fuel tank.
Now that we have our tank installed, tell me about all the other things we can bolt onto the Jimny.
Yeah, so some of the things we've got to think about when we're designing a tank is things like bash plates. We've certainly got that covered, so during the design stage we actually hunt around and look what other manufacturers are building, and we certainly try to make sure that our tank is compatible with all of those things, because we realise that the customers that want a long-range fuel tank probably also got all these accessories because they've got it all kitted out to do what they need to do. And things like suspension upgrades such as the OME lift kit, all those sorts of things we're certainly compatible with. One thing on this particular vehicle in the Jimny, because we are modifying the exhaust, there might be some sports exhaust systems out there that we're not compatible with. There is one that is compatible, and that's Talk It. We've actually been working pretty hard with those during the development of this, and they've got a kit already on the market available for this. So that is certainly one of the key aspects of designing our tanks, just to make sure that they fit with all of the other accessories on the market for sure.
Well guys, there you have it. If you've been considering a Longranger fuel tank, go check out their website. There's heaps of great FAQs on there, and if you have any more questions, just give the team here a call. There's over 100,000 Longranger tanks out there being put to the test, so that should hopefully give you some confidence.